Hello everyone. Well, this is plan B. Since the live stream literally doesn't want to work, I'm going to have to talk to the cable company and see if there's anything obvious that's happening on their end that's messing with it. Because we had 2 or 3 great streams where it was absolutely flawless. And then last week it didn't work. Today it didn't work. I set the visual quality to like a tiny little square at a very low, and it still was a bad stream with buffering, and you know, about 30 of you guys just told me it was unwatchable, and I totally believe you, and I probably wouldn't watch it myself, because if you can't see it, what's the point, right? It's like watching TV with a big black cloth hanging over it. All right, so, couple things. Number one, there's no stream next Saturday anyway, so even if it was working, I can't because I'm going to be at MACNA working my booth. I also give a talk Saturday morning, so if you're coming to MACNA, first talk of the day is going to be me. And you definitely don't want to miss that talk because I talk about what to avoid in aquarium disasters. You know, I have a much better title than that, but basically we're wanting to make sure that you're prepared for every possible contingency before it ever happens, so when it does, you're ready and you know what to do. That's the talk. Second news is the puffer is finally in his new puffer home, which is awesome. The guy that adopted him has a 400-gallon tank with a couple of other puffers, and he added it to that. So Murderer is going to be really happy. And I told them, you can rename him if you like, but to me, he'll always be Murderer. Third thing, I did post my tank water quality results today, again on Instagram. So you go to instagram.com/MelevsReef, and you'll see all my numbers for today, good, bad, indifferent. I'll go over them really quickly with you and tell you why nothing changed. My salinity is a little bit low, 1.024, and I did not add salt water to act as my top off, so the number didn't come up like I was going to. I had no time this week. My DKH has gone down a fraction because I didn't refill the calcium reactor. Nitrates seem to be about the same, but I did add more biopellets, so that one should come down. And my magnesium dropped, and I need to mix up another gallon of magnesium and get that hooked up under the tank so that way it can replenish that. It's kind of fun for me whenever I dose magnesium, because it's not a normal thing for me to dose. I start seeing coralline circles appearing on the glass, dink, dink, dink. And that's kind of fun, you know, it's like, I mean, yes, I scrape it off obviously, but it's sort of like an instant result. Within a couple of days of putting another gallon of magnesium on my reef, and it trickles in about 90 milliliters every single day. I just like to see the results of the addition of magnesium to my tank making a difference visually. And because a lot of things we add, you can't tell visually. I mean, it's not an obvious thing like, oh, alkalinity is perfect right now when I look at my tank. That's actually one of those ones that gets away from us really quickly. The main topic that today's live stream was going to be about was food. So I'm going to do it here on camera. And then feel free to post lots of comments below, and I will answer all of your questions or your discussions. The very first thing I want to talk about is something I kind of heard like a rumor a while back, and of course it terrified me to my core. And that is that this food right here was no longer going to be available. And my fish love this stuff. It looks like Fruity Pebbles. And this stuff is made by Marineland or Instant Ocean. And it works in auto feeders really, really well. And I've been using it for years. And at MACNA, I think a year ago, they were giving them away at their booth. And you know, I said, I really love this stuff. Can I have more than one? And the guy said, yeah, take as many as you want because we're not making it anymore. And I think we should all band together and force them to keep making this because it's great. I use it in an auto feeder, like this one here by Eheim. By the way, what does this say? Yeah, see? It says turtle feeder on the front. I found this on Amazon. And the Eheim auto feeder, the one that's for fish, costs like $7 or $9 more than the turtle feeder, and they're identical. The only difference is it says turtle on the box. The feeder is identical. So, if you've never used one of these before, I really like it. They cost about, I don't know, 40, 50 bucks, maybe a little less on Amazon. And this would sit on the top of your tank, and then the food goes in the drum, and when it starts, I don't think there's any batteries in here. Yeah, there's not, because this is my backup. When the timer goes off, it will turn this drum, and food falls out of that hole that you can choose how much food you want to be dispensed each time it makes a rotation. And it really stays well in that spot. It doesn't, the door doesn't slide easily. Now, it moves for you, but it's not going to like suddenly crack open and dump everything out. The downside is occasionally when you fill this drum up with half of that bag of food, so it's full, is that if this thing decides to go crazy and just keeps spinning and spinning and spinning forever, all the food goes in your tank at once. So if you want to limit your risk, only put in a week's worth. I actually have one of these on all 3 of my tanks. It's on my 400 gallon, it's on the 60 gallon anemone cube, and it's on the frag system because of the yellow tang. And each tank gets a different program. So my main reef, this guy dumps into the tank at 12:30 and at 6:30. At 12:30 it makes 1 rotation. At 6:30 it makes 2 rotations. The clown tank is around 5 o'clock and it gets 1 rotation. And the frag system, I think it's around 3 o'clock, it makes 1 rotation. So it works really good with this food. And I have an open bag here. So I know I showed you the front of the package, but I'll show you inside. Maybe the lighting will show you what's in there. Ah, it's so bad. Let's see. We can't do it. There's not enough. Hang on, I got an idea. Does this work? Oh, it's glowing. All right, let's try that. Nah, it's not going to work. Dang it. Anyway, this stuff looks really like Fruity Pebbles, and I love eating kids' foods. So it makes total sense that I would use it. Let me turn off my flashlight before I kill my battery. All right. That's the dry food I like to use in my tank, and it gets used every single day in 3 tanks. And I want this to continue. I want to hoard it, and I want to keep using it. So if you guys haven't used it yet, you should try it. I gave it to a friend of mine. I told him about it, and he's like, this food sounds amazing. I want some. So I gave him one of my precious bags. I mean, he's helped me so much. I was like, yeah, here, you can have a bag. And he told me, oh my God, this stuff's amazing. My fish love it. And I said, I know, that's why I use it. And it's not just, because you're like, oh, well, what does that mean? My fish love it. They actually go into the area. I use these things that I call auto feeder chimneys or Eheim chimneys. I've been making this bracket for years. And the food goes in there and it sits in there, and then it gets wet and it drizzles into the reef. And the fish will swim into the chimney, and they're all like, their faces are sticking up in the water because they're trying to devour it the moment it hits the water. They know what time it is, so they know exactly when food's about to drop. They'll even circle under there, or they'll start poking their faces up, ready to go, because they want the food that soon. That's dry food. There's other dry foods that I like to use, and there may be some that you like to use. For example, a lot of people talk about coral frenzy. And this one here would be a nice food to use for some of your LPS corals. Obviously, your fish are going to eat it too. And let's see, have I ever opened this? I have a lot of food here, so a lot of times I have brand new stuff. Yeah, I've not opened it. Wow. So it looks kind of chunky, but maybe that's because I've had it for so long. Oh, I'm making a mess. So you can see but it's a powder. So yeah, see, it collapses pretty easily. Kind of looks a little bit like really fine GFO. And you can mix this with a little bit of tank water, and then you can pour it in the tank. That way you know it'll disperse and not just float on the surface. You can make a slurry and put it in a pipette or a syringe, and you can squirt the food toward the individual corals. Usually the best case when you're trying to target a coral like that is to turn off your return pumps and turn off the in-tank flow so the food will stay in one spot. But there's another way of feeding. It's called broadcast feeding, and you just put it in, let the reef blow it around, and it just lands on whatever corals happen to grab some. Another thing you can do is you can wait about 10 to 15 minutes after putting in some food to activate the corals, to get them in the mood. And then you can go feed your corals because now all their polyps are out and they're ready because they're already hungry. I have a big bubble coral that grew from a little frag. I got it at a store called Elos here in Texas. And it was a really cute little frag. That's why I had to have it, because it was so tiny. And it has grown quite large. And I've noticed every single night around 9:30, because, well, yeah, 9:30 to 10:30, in that hour, that's when wow, I'm inhaling the coral frenzy. That coral is prepared for all the food to hit the water and already has feeder tentacles out, even though it's a bubble coral. You see all these tentacles. Okay, that should help. Here's a dry food from Two Little Fishies called Sea Veggies. It's a flake food. And you can see I've used a lot of it. And let's see. Looks a lot like the Fruity Pebbles stuff, except it's only for herbivores. And it has, it's red seaweed, the entire container, one color. Okay. Many years ago, when I first got into this hobby, I went to the fish store and I bought something called Formula One. And that was the omnivore diet. And then they had Formula 2, that was the herbivore diet. And this is Formula 1, so this will be for every kind of fish. But these are giant flakes. And I was buying pellets. And I just want to give you a heads up, when it comes to pellet food, make sure you read the label. Look very carefully at everything on there before you walk out the door. Because I bought a jar of pellet food, and I came home, and the pellets were like nuggets. They were huge. The fish had no idea what to do with them. They would grab one in their mouth and swim around, didn't want to let go of it because some other fish might get it, but they couldn't eat it. So I called the fish store and I said, I got the wrong one, can I please bring it back and trade it? And you know, of course he said, you opened it. And, Anyway, I convinced him to let me trade it for the small pellet because I wanted little pellets that they can just gobble up and put in their bellies. Another dry food that I like to use is Rod's. You're going to see a lot of Rod's food here in the next few minutes. I'm wearing the shirt. I thought, I'll wear this shirt because I'm talking about this food. This is the seaweed package, and there's 3 different kinds of seaweed in here. There's a green nori, there's a red nori, and then there is this kind of, well, it's a seaweed, obviously. I don't really know what to call it. It kind of reminds me of a Brillo pad. And you can see here it's kind of purple colored, and okay, I'm going to be honest. I'm not really a fan of this one. So I have lots of it, and I even give that part away to people. I love to use the sheet because it fits on my clip really nice. So here's the green one, and then over here is the red one. And I use one, okay, so we're going to talk about quantity here in a moment. I use one of these each time I feed, which I'm feeding 5 tangs and some other fish that decide to eat it as well. But if you have 1 tang, for example, in your tank, putting this much nori in your tank will just add to your phosphate issues. So take your sheet and tear it in half. And you could even tear it in half again. And this could be a portion for that tang. And that might be too much also. But you can take it and you can make it small. You know, if you just stick it on a clip like this in the flow, the fish might even avoid it at first. It might be frightened by this weird thing moving, especially if it's bigger than the fish. But I like to shrink it down by rolling it up like I talked about in my last video, and then have the clip really grab it. That's why I always pinch the clip extra tight to make sure it's got a good grip, because you don't want a fish just rip it out and it goes and blows and sticks against the overflow where they ignore it, or it sticks against the edge of a pump and they ignore it. There are fish that go around the tank and they will pick at algae on pumps or on the rock work, but I want it in their belly. I don't want it just straddling a coral. You know, I want it to be used. And I don't want to have a lot of it in the tank. So you can use the food, and the general rule is if food is in your tank more than 5 minutes, it's been there too long. Whatever the fish eat in the first 5 minutes, that's enough food. And to avoid overfeeding because of water quality problems. And, you know, I love to feed my fish. I overfeed them all the time, and that's why I have phosphates. But keep that in mind. You don't have to use as much as what the portion is that you're buying from the fish store. For example, here are some bloodworms. I've got this cooler full of frozen food. And so you can see they're individual portions. But you may be in a situation where you have 3 fish in a nano tank. And this is much too much of a cube for 3 little fish. Let's say you have a clown goby and you have a Bengai cardinal and you have a clownfish. You can take one of these cubes, pop it out, and take a knife on a cutting board and just cut it in half or cut it in thirds. And use half of a cube today and half of a cube tomorrow. There's no reason you have to use the full cube. You can split these up into smaller amounts if you like. Now, because I have such a large tank and I'm feeding so many fish, I don't do what I just described to you because I don't even buy these very often. The only reason I buy this particular food, okay, it's crinkling too much. The only reason I buy this is for my copper band butterfly. I want to make sure that that fish gets some worms in his belly, and so every single day 1 cube goes into the mixture. Another food that I like to use is krill, and I buy this from the fish store. Frank's Tanks down the street from me. And this is a big tub of krill. This is a brand new container. And so you've got all these krills in here. And I like to put a few of these. I'll grab a pinch of these, like about this much. So I've got about 4 or 5 in my hand. 6. And I put that in my little bowl of food I'm going to feed to my tank. And I actually put it in there specifically for Spock. Spock really enjoys the larger food because she's a larger fish. And so she needs to fill her belly. And to put pellets or flake, it's kind of an insult to her and she gets mad at me. And the reason I get such a large container of krill is because I use so much food that it wouldn't be cost efficient to get little tiny packages. But let's talk about some of the other foods I've been using from Rod. So this is the herbivore blend, and it's a sheet. It's pretty thin. And this is going to have a lot of the veggies in it, which is what your fish need. And the food itself, let's see if I can show you. See, it moves about when it's been out in the air for a little while. This stuff's been sitting next to me for about 15 minutes, but I have a bunch of ice on it too. And when you first get this, it's going to be, hard as a rock, and you keep it in your freezer. Do not leave frozen food on your counter. If you leave it on the counter, especially overnight, toss it. I sometimes see people posting, hey, I left this food out. It's been out for hours. What do you think I should do? Throw it away. Get some new food. Just like if you leave food on the counter overnight for yourself, typically you don't eat that, right? So throw it away. Buy a new package. Take the food out. Break up a small piece. Now, with the brand new package, I noticed it was sometimes very hard to get into it successfully on the brand new package because it's a Ziploc, and because it's frozen and the food's right up to the actual Ziploc line, I was having troubles when I tear it open. It would actually break the bag, and then you couldn't seal it. So I discovered by holding it under a faucet and just letting some hot water, or just any kind of water, it doesn't even have to be hot, it can just be lukewarm water because that's still warmer than the frozen food. Just get that wet for a couple of seconds under the faucet, and then when you peel it open, it'll open up without tearing the Ziploc, and you can get your food out. And then I break off a small amount, a piece this big, and I put in a small bowl of tank water to thaw, so that way when I feed my tank, it can disperse so everyone can get a bite without fighting each other. I really like the regular blend. That's the herbivore, and that's all I had left. The other one that I would have talked about for a little bit longer is the standard one. It's orange, and it's the one I prefer to use all the time, and I use it every single night. Then, if you don't want to buy the tub of krill like I showed you, this is a krill mix that you can get, and it's got the krill, of course, inside there, but it also has, I can't even say these words. I'll just hold this up and let you read it. I see these words all the time, but I never try to say them out loud, and then when I try and say them out loud on camera, I always embarrass myself. The foods, again, they're going to be a little bit hard to break off. I tend to take my sheet and put it on the counter, and I bend it slightly and I hit it. And then it breaks up into some pieces, and then I can pull a piece out. And if I have to, I can break the piece in half and put that in my little bowl to feed my tank. And because I had Murderer for a while, I was using the Predator mix. And this is big, chunky foods. Big pieces of squid and octopus and clam. And let's see what else. Whole shrimp, scallop, oyster, whole squid, whole octopus, perch, whole krill, green seaweed, raw seaweed, brine shrimp, mini pellets, omega-3 fatty acids, and that ASTAXANTHIN word that I'm going to botch. And I would break off pieces of this and thaw it, and then I would feed it to the puffer, and the puffer would just inhale it, spit it out, until he shredded enough to get it down his throat. And Spock was getting little bits of this too, that like little tiny squid tentacles. And then for all your little tiny fish, you can get fish eggs. And I like to use these. And what I really do, and it's no lie, every single time I mix up the different foods for the night, I take from different brands and put them all in one bowl. Even though Most of it's Rod's food. I'm getting all of his different flavors. And I know a lot of it's in the same one, but I just feel like I want to diversify. Probably. Instead of just one thing, I like to put, 3 or 4 different things in the bowl every single night. And I feed 3 tanks with it. Plus I feed fish that are down in the sump. So it's kind of 4 tanks. And I'm feeding about 60 fish a day. I can tell you this. Different foods do different things, obviously for their diet. But the point that I was trying to say was that if you use the same amount of Rod's food as the same amount as another food you use, you may end up using too much. Rod's food you should use more sparingly because there's a lot in it. And a little bit goes a long way is the point I'm trying to say. So if you can avoid overfeeding your tank, that'd be smart. And again, any food you add should be gone within 5 minutes. Now, if you're not able to get that kind of food, I also have another one here that I get at the fish store. So this is mysis shrimp. And this is a huge sheet. This will last me probably a month and a half, 2 months. And again, same principle, heat it up a little bit to get this open the first time under some tap water. And then I break off a chunk. And the reason I use this one here is because there's a lot of little bites in there. And I just feel like having a little bit of everything in there will work. Now, before the army of people come after me for not mentioning Larry's food, I have some of Larry's food in my freezer. I have purchased it before and I've used it. I've used Roger's food. I've used stuff from Hikari. These are just my preferred ones. And this is what I like to use. Last year I bought something because I read about it in Reef Builders. There was a type of fish eggs that Larry's food was selling that was rare, and he said you only have a small window to buy it. So I went and bought one, and it's this. I can't remember what I kept asking. What kind of fish is this from? And I'm sure at some point he told me, and I don't even remember. But some people really like to put in some special diet in their reef, and sometimes I think our fish eat better than we do. Because we're like, I'll have some pizza, but let me get that $30 package of fish food for my fish, or $40 or $50. And we really spoil our babies because we love them. And so I have been using different foods, including those, but these are the ones that I've showed you now are pretty much my staple, all those frozens. And I use frozen food every single night. Now, I want to get into another point about feeding because if I was thinking, I read a lot of comments by people, and they say to me, oh, I only feed my tank once a day, or I only feed my tank once a week, or I only feed it every 3 days. And I'm thinking, that's crazy, because I eat all day long. I mean, I am the worst. I love sweets. And I'm constantly putting something in my mouth. And I just feel like our fish, in nature, would be constantly picking at the rockwork, looking for things in the water column, and trying to devour algae specifically. Of course, they eat other things. We talked about fish eggs. Well, when corals or fish spawn, all the other fish come up and devour it. It's kind of amazing we even have corals left in the ocean, or little baby fish, because I see the egg and sperm hit the water, and then 50 other fish come in, and then it's all gone. And you're thinking, well, how did a little fish survive any of that? How did the sperm and the egg stay together and come down to the rockwork and stay safely and not get devoured by something else? It's kind of phenomenal that we have tiny clownfish. Because, like I said, everyone's eating whatever they can get in their mouths in the ocean, and yet somehow there's always a new family of clowns. And yeah, I saw Finding Nemo. I know only one egg mattered, but it is kind of amazing to me. I really don't understand how we end up with new fish, just seeing the appetite of fish in the ocean when I go diving. One thing I did was I did a thread on Reef to Reef, and I asked people, how often do you feed your tank? And what time do you feed? I didn't really care what they offered. I just wanted to know how frequently. And I was really surprised that a lot of people that responded on that thread, and I'll put the link to that thread in the video description, it was a lot of responses were, I feed 3 times a day, I feed 5 times a day, I feed all the time. And so if you want to feed your tank a lot, you can. Just smaller portions. I know some guys that have a small tank on their desk at work, and they're taking phone calls, and they're working at their computer, tackety-tackety-tack. And then they see their fish next to them, and they open their little package of whatever, and they put in a couple of pellets for the fish to eat, and they go back to work, and then a little while later they do it because they enjoy feeding the fish. But if you put in a ton of food every single time, yeah, you're going to end up having a mess in that tank. Algae everywhere, cyano outbreaks, dino flagellates, you name it, these issues arise. But if you put in a couple of pellets, you're golden. And you can do that frequently and enjoy it. And it's fun to feed the fish. One experience that I got to do, it's not on camera, it's kind of a bummer. So you guys saw the video of the 20,000 gallon reef that I visited at Long Island 2 years ago? And no, well, it was less than that. And then I put up the video about a year ago. It's that 1 hour video that talks about this massive reef that's been around for about 15, 16 years and it's never crashed. I mean, that's phenomenal right there. I was on the top of the tank. There's this gantry you can walk on. And I walk across, I'm looking down at all these huge coral colonies on both sides of me. And all the fish, they're swimming everywhere. And I look in front of me, and there are buckets and buckets of fish food, dry fish, pellet food, sitting there. So I said, hey, Joe, can I feed your fish? He's like, yeah, that's fine. And so I grab this bucket, and I sit cross-legged on the gantry with this bucket in my lap. And, I've popped the lid off, and I reach in, and I grab 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 pellets. I mean, it was nothing, right? And I went, tink. And the fish all swarmed like piranha. And then I did it again, tink. And I'm doing this, and Joe says, Mark, what are you doing? I said, I'm feeding your fish. He says, you can use more than that. I said, if I do it this way, I can do it longer. And so I kept throwing in a few pellets, and the fish would swarm, and I did it. And I sat there for 10 minutes, throwing in a few little tiny nuggets at a time. And it was fun. And I really enjoyed doing that. I'd like to go back just to feed his fish. So, yes, you can feed more frequently, just don't feed as much. And that way you don't ruin the water quality of your tank. Because I know you guys are worried about that. And I understand many of you are new, and you don't even know what a real portion of food is. So I just wanted to kind of give you an example. Let's take this disc that came off of that Coral Frenzy I showed you. This is about the size of the container that I thaw my tank water in every night. And it's about this tall. It's actually one of those little one-portion applesauce cups that you would put in a lunch for a kid to go to school. Or after school they come home, you want a snack, you give them a little applesauce. I save those containers. I have like 2, 3, whatever. It's not like I save thousands of them. And those are specifically for melting fish food every night. And then all you got to do is you put in your frozen foods, to fill up that cup. And so, I'm feeding all these tanks, so I pretty much fill the entire circle. There's that much food, and it's probably about that tall of how much food goes in there. And, it's broken chunks, so it's not like a solid brick of food. And then I add tank water, and in 15 minutes it's melted. And I take a pipette, and I slurp it up, and I squirt a few squirts into the anemone cube for the clownfish and the tang to get a bite. And then I feed some to the frag system, because there's a tang in there. And then I pour the bulk of it into the reef, of course. And then I put a few squirts with a pipette into the sump for the couple of fish I have down there. And then I come around to the front again, and if there's big pieces like krill in my bowl, I put those back in the tank for Spock, because she is circled and she's like, where's more? And then I go to the anemone cube and I pour in the last of whatever's in that bowl, it's some crumbs. And they, of course, go crazy and eat some more mysis and whatever bits were still in there. And that is my feeding routine every single night. Besides the auto feeders dropping in food that I mentioned at the beginning of this video, and then occasionally, not regularly, I clip some nori to the glass. Like I showed you guys Spock eating on that last video on Thursday night. Whew, she was pulling hard on there. I was wondering if it was going to rip it apart on camera, because it never happens. Actually, a funny story about that feeding clip. So a couple of years ago, I had that feeding clip on the end of my tank instead of the front. And I look over, and I'd put a sheet of nori on there, and I slid it down so the fish were tearing at it. And as they were tearing at it, they kind of made the feeding clip go down lower and lower and lower. It was kind of almost down to the substrate. And I caught this out of the corner of my eye. I saw Spock pull the clip so hard, it actually came off the magnet. So here's your magnet, here's your feeding clip. It pulled it away, and then it went back. I was like, oh, that was kind of neat looking. And it happened 2 or 3 times where it kind of pulled away and went back because she was really pulling hard. Oh, another trick about nori. I'm jumping around. I'm sorry. I'll continue the story in a second. But one of the things I do with nori when I buy a package of it is I leave it open. I actually want it to be soggy. I don't want it to be dry and brittle. So when I get a brand new package, first thing I do is I tear it open and leave it in my feeding basket over there, and I let it get moist, and that way it folds, it rolls, it doesn't crinkle and snap and break up like brittle, which is great for me. And that works out really well. The fish seem to tear it off better too than when it's a very dried out sheet of nori. So I would recommend letting it be acclimated to air, and then you can take your piece out and put it on. Okay, so I told you I have Spock ripping on it, and she pulls it apart. Well, this is the craziest thing. I couldn't believe it. She pulled it off, and of course the thing is designed to float and end up on the other end of the reef. And I thought, oh man, I gotta walk all the way around the tank to the other side to get this thing. And so I'm making the lap, and I can't find it anywhere. I mean, literally, I'm like, where's this feeding clip? And I'm looking all over the tank. And what had happened was the feeding clip, floated upward, got caught in the vortex flow, which sent it the other direction, and it did a loop, and it actually went back and reconnected to the magnet on the glass. It was the most insane thing. I wish I'd caught it on camera because no one is going to believe this story. But the magnet stuck to the outside of the tank and stayed in place like I showed you. And this thing drifted around and reconnected because I was going off to go get it to reconnect it. And by the time I'd made my lap around a 7-foot tank, it was already back on the front panel. It's like, that is crazy. And I told Julian, I said, you won't believe what just happened. And he was laughing too. So it's a true story. Absolutely true. That's it for feeding for this video. There's so many other things we could talk about. This would drag on forever, and I didn't want to drag on forever. I want to answer your questions. If you have questions about certain foods, please ask me below. I'll answer whatever I know, or I'll direct you to what I know. I have an article that will be in the description that's all about feeding, including DIY food. I'm not opposed to that. I used to do it myself all the time. I made my own food. I'm just too busy. And for me to go to the store and buy certain foods and then get out the food processor, because a blender really doesn't cut it, and shred all these foods. And what was I shredding? I would buy a big bag of food from the Asian store that had squid and octopus and mussel. One thing that they had in there was a fake lobster meat. I always threw that away. I never used it because it wasn't real. And I used to make my own, and I'd pour in some spirulina powder, and I added a little bit of garlic extract, and I would put in lots of cubes from brands you can buy from the fish store to create this diverse food. And yes, you'll save money making it. I don't have the time to make it. So I am just buying fish food. I go to my store, I tell them what I want. One more thing, if there's a certain food you want from your fish store and they don't have it, do not let them tell you they can't get it. That is total BS. And it actually aggravates the heck out of me. So if you are going to go to the fish store and you say, oh, well, they don't sell Rod's food in my store, then you tell them, I want Rod's food. Let me know when it comes in. If I'm your only customer, that's fine. If I have to wait 2 weeks, that's fine. Just get me my food. It's the same thing with Larry's Food or with Hikari or whatever brand you want, because every fish store gets stuff from a distributor. And the distributor has everything. And the only reason the fish store doesn't carry that food is it's not in their inventory, or it's not on their computer, or they just don't feel like putting it on the shelf. But if you say, for example, if you said, look, I want a lionfish, and they're like, we don't have lionfish, you would just say, I will wait until you get one in. So what's the difference? If you say, I want a certain skimmer, I want a certain light, I want a certain tank, they get it. You say I want a certain food, they'll get it. And, and I'm talking about frozen foods. These are things that you really don't necessarily want to even attempt to find online. But, the dry goods stuff, or, if you need an Eheim auto feeder, you can get those at Petco or PetSmart, or you can get it on Amazon. But, like frozen foods, I had a friend that said, I can't get a certain brand of food anymore. It was Rod's in this case. The store had decided to switch. And he told me the store wouldn't do it, and I got really aggravated. And, well, guess what? A couple phone calls later, that store was getting the food for him. Because, you should be able to get what you want. And you should never feel like you're painted into a corner because you're the consumer. Enough with my rant. Let's just get to your questions. Post them below. Hopefully I can get this stream thing resolved so we can get back on track, because I really like doing these streams on Saturday. I think that they're fun, and I like seeing your questions pop up on the screen during the conversation so I can address them. And I'm working really hard to keep coming out with videos regularly. I know in the past I wasn't, and I'm squeezing it into my time right now as best I can, but I have a lot going on, and I have so much to do in the next 3 days, 4 days. I have 4 days of work left, including today, before I have to leave for MACNA. And, well, you know, I'm uploading a video today. So there should possibly be one more that sneaks out before I hit the road. We'll see. We'll see what the internet speed is like for uploading anything from Macna. Don't know. Maybe I'll have a decent Wi-Fi signal there. And be sure to check. I want you to post your water parameter results today on Instagram. You can use the hashtag water testing, hashtag post your results. That'd be great. That way I can find it. You can also do @Melev's Reef, so I will be pulled to your page so I can check out your parameters. If you want to chat with me on Facebook, it's facebook.com/Melev's Reef. And that is a page you should like and follow because I add all kinds of interesting things pretty much every single day. My buddy's Dwayne's tank, I just shared it yesterday. Remember I talked about it a couple weeks ago? He shot some video of the tank. He walks around the entire tank. That reef is gorgeous. I told you guys I had something big going on with my reef here next month. And I'm going to just tell you what's going to happen because I'm kind of excited. Well, I'm very excited about it. So Dwayne is flying in to help me with my reef. And we're going to tear out corals and clean it up and put new frags in there. And he's going to help me. And I think it's great. I'm so excited because he keeps doing that. And I don't. I let it grow and let it grow naturally, let it grow wild. But he resets his tank after a year or two or 3. It's usually less. It's kind of crazy. He constantly goes in there and rips it to shreds. And he's going to help me do mine. And I'm excited about that because I'm going to make it a party. And the hope is that the live stream will work because I want to stream live or do time lapse or just shoot straight video of what it's going to be like to do this on the tank that day. And it's going to be the middle Saturday of September, which I believe is the 16th of September. And so what I'm doing, because I said I want it to be a party, I want it to be like a viewing party. Obviously, if you can be online to watch it, that'd be great. But I'm going to invite some people here and have a barbecue at the same time. And there's going to be food, drink. It's going to be a Melev's Reef party. And people can watch us as we work on the tank. And while we have our arms in there and we're pulling things out, frags are going to break and people are going to walk out the door with some frags. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And I think it's going to be a long job. I think it'll take us 8 hours that day easily. Obviously, we're not streaming for hours and hours. But if we can do, a few minutes here or a few minutes there, I think that would be really fun to let you guys see what's going on that day, some progress. I'll do updated pictures as allowed, as my time allows. My hands aren't soaking wet on the Melev's Reef page on Facebook. And, maybe we'll stagger some stuff to Instagram. My goal is YouTube. That's what I want to do. Is I really would like to stream it to YouTube. And I better have that stream working great by then. I don't know. I kind of want the cable company to run a wire straight to a camera and tell me it's terabytes of speed. That's what I want. Is that too much to ask? So that's really exciting for me because I've been avoiding it like the plague. I have not wanted to touch it. So thank you so much for watching the channel, for subscribing, for liking and commenting. And you guys are just growing this thing. It's awesome. And I'm just going to keep providing content. So let me go put this frozen fish food away because we're done.